The work we know today as the Goldberg Variations only became known by that name many long years after Bach's death. The full title that appeared on the dedication page of the original edition, the first published edition, reads Keyboard Practice consisting of an aria with diverse variations for the harpsichord with 2 manuals. And Bach below that adds the words that might be paraphrased loosely as prepared for the delight of the minds of music lovers. There is a striking paradox about this work in that it is music that richly rewards the deepest analytical study of every formal detail. And as with so much of Bach's greatest music, its compositional virtuosity and its intellectual sophistication are mind-boggling. And yet, it is a work that over time has grown to be immensely popular with the music-loving public. And that popularity has exploded since the middle of the 20th century, when Glenn Gould made his famous first recording of the variations. Perhaps part of this paradox can be explained by the fact that these variations move so effortlessly from sheer exuberant delight to gravity, profundity, and then back again. While concert performances a century ago were relatively rare, today scores of performances take place all over the world, probably for the most part on the piano, sometimes on the harpsichord, and not infrequently in a variety of arrangements for string trio or string orchestra. It is a work that can certainly be said to possess a kind of universality, and yet it is not the kind of universality we associate, say, with the last movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, or even with Bach's own Passion According to St. Matthew, or the Great B minor Mass. Bach is not addressing in this piece the totality of humanity the way those works do. It is rather an intimate and highly distilled expression of a deep and abiding reverent faith in a divine cosmic order, in which the mind and the soul of the composer, the performer, and the listener both participate and observe. Although by no means necessary for the enjoyment of the music, even a partial awareness and understanding of the various elegant symmetries of the work and its architecture can certainly add to one's appreciation of Bach's achievement. The 30 variations which are framed by the aria and its return at the end of the work are not variations on a theme in the manner of most variation sets of the later 18th century. Once we hear the beautiful and ornate melody of the 32-bar aria, we never hear it again except at the very end of the work, when it is repeated, just as we heard it at the beginning. What we do hear repeated throughout the work, although not always in a manner that is explicit or obvious, is the 32-bar bass line, or ground bass, one note of the ground bass for each bar of the aria. These 32 bars are divided into 2 symmetrical halves of 16 bars each, which may be repeated at the discretion of the performer. And what is definitely worth pointing out is the fact that the macrostructure of the entire piece mirrors the structure of the ground bass in the aria itself. The 30 variations, plus the aria at the beginning and the return of the aria at the end, make 32 short movements, one for each note of the ground bass on which the harmonic structure of the aria is based. A still more interesting and complex symmetry is manifested in the fact that the variations clearly fall into 10 groups of 3, or 10 trinities, if you will. These groups being clearly demarcated by the fact that every third variation is a canon in which the second voice imitates the first voice precisely throughout the variation. A further pattern evolves in the consistency throughout the work with which a group of 3 begins with some kind of dance movement, followed by a brilliant toccata or display piece, and then the canon. There is yet another level of compositional virtuosity at play here, and here we might be struck with wonder at Bach's skill and inventiveness within the very strict rules he set for himself, because each successive canon is composed with the imitating voice at a progressively more distant interval. The first canon, variation 3, is a canon at the unison. The second canon, variation 6, is a canon at the interval of the second. Variation 9, the canon at the third, and so on. Only the 30th variation, which concludes the final trinity, is not a canon, but is called a quodlibet, a traditional name for a kind of potpourri of popular or folk tunes, the texts of which involve a wonderful joke, perhaps one in which the composer is even poking fun at himself. One of the songs is set to the text, Kraut und Rüben hab mich verdrüben, cabbages and beets have driven me away. And the second line of that is, Hätt meine Mutter Fleisch gekocht, dann wäre ich länger blieben. If my mother had cooked more meat, I might have stayed around longer. Within this highly rigorous structure, Bach sets before us a miniature encyclopedia of the keyboard styles and techniques of his time. In addition to dance movements of all kinds and this dazzling array of brilliant display pieces, there are two slow arioso-like movements, one of which, the intensely chromatic and climactic 25th variation, which Wanda Landowska referred to famously as the crown of thorns, rises to a level of emotional intensity and raw grief that is seldom matched and perhaps nowhere surpassed anywhere in the Baroque period or perhaps anywhere in the 18th century. What ultimately makes this work so deeply satisfying as an artistic whole is the gamut of characters and emotional states through which it passes, and the sense of a journey and a return home, a journey which traverses territory full of joy and fun and humor and wit, as well as deep tragedy. In his wonderful book, Bach, Music in the Castle of Heaven, Sir John Eliot Gardiner writes about the cantatas in a way that could equally be applied to the variations. Sir John Eliot writes, a musical work such as a Bach cantata is manifestly a journey from a beginning through a middle and to an end. And yet at that end, the light it casts in the memory on all that has gone before creates the feeling that we are constantly in a state of arrival, leading to a sense of being aware of and thus valuing our own consciousness, both now and in what went before. And if we accept that one part of the human psyche searches for a spiritual outlet and indeed a spiritual input, then however materialistic our society may have become, however agnostic the zeitgeist, for those who have the ears to hear it, the confident and overwhelmingly affirmative music of Bach can go a long way towards meeting this need. For Bach is of the very front rank of composers since 1700 whose entire work was geared one way or another towards the spiritual and the metaphysical, celebrating life, but also befriending and exorcising death. He saw both the essence and practice of music as religious and understood that the more perfectly a composition is realized, both conceptually and through performance, the more God is immanent in the music. He wrote in the margin of his copy of Kalov's Bible commentary, where there is devotional music, God with his grace is always present. Sir John Eliot concludes this passage saying, this strikes me as a tenet that many of us as musicians automatically hold and aspire to whenever we meet to play music, regardless of whatever God we happen to believe in. So I'm going to begin with the first variation, which one great keyboard player called a festive gateway into the world of the variations.